The Galactic Council chamber was a vast, domed structure, its walls made of shimmering, translucent material that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of light. The air was thick with the hum of alien languages, the clicks, whistles, and guttural tones of species from across the galaxy. Representatives from hundreds of civilizations sat in their designated pods, their forms as varied as the stars they came from. Some were towering, insect-like creatures with iridescent exoskeletons. Others were gelatinous blobs that pulsed gently, their communication carried through subtle changes in color. And then there were the humans, the newcomers, sitting in a modest pod near the edge of the chamber. They were small, fragile-looking compared to the others, their pale skin and simple clothing a stark contrast to the grandeur of the council. The session had been going on for hours, with debates about trade routes, resource allocation, and territorial disputes. The humans had been silent for most of it, observing, learning, but then the topic shifted to Earth, and the tone of the chamber changed. The Zorlax, a species known for their arrogance and disdain for weaker races, took the floor. Their representative, a tall, reptilian creature with scales that glinted like polished metal, began to speak. Its voice was a deep, mocking rumble that echoed through the chamber. Earth, it sneered, a backwater planet with a species that has barely mastered the art of spaceflight. They are primitive, divided, and weak. They have no place in this council. Their presence here is an insult to the greatness of the Galactic Union. The chamber erupted in a chorus of agreement. Other species joined in, their voices overlapping as they ridiculed humanity. They spoke of Earth's wars, its pollution, its inability to unite under a single banner. They laughed at the idea that humans could ever contribute anything of value to the galaxy. The humans sat quietly, their faces unreadable, but their fists clenched tightly. Then, the human diplomat stood. She was a small woman, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, her suit simple and unadorned. She walked to the center of the chamber, her steps measured and deliberate. The room fell silent, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. What could this primitive creature possibly have to say? She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces of the beings who had just mocked her species. Then she began to speak. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was a fire in her words that could not be ignored. "You call us primitive," she said, "and yet, we have survived. We have survived plagues, wars, and natural disasters that would have wiped out lesser species. We have stared into the void of space and dared to dream of reaching the stars. You call us divided, and yet, we have come together, time and time again, to face challenges that threatened our very existence. You call us weak, and yet, we have endured. We have endured because we are resilient, because we are stubborn, because we refuse to give up." The chamber was silent now, the mocking laughter replaced by a tense, uneasy quiet. The diplomat continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You sit here, in your pods, surrounded by your technology and your wealth, and you look down on us, but you forget one thing. We are not defined by our past. We are defined by our future, and our future is one of exploration, of discovery, of growth. We may be new to this council, but we are not new to the struggle for survival, and we will not be dismissed so easily." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming device. It was a simple piece of technology, a data chip, but it held something far more valuable than any of the advanced gadgets in the room. She held it up for all to see. "This," she said, "is a record of every major achievement in human history, every invention, every discovery, every act of courage and resilience. It is a testament to who we are and what we are capable of, and it is a reminder that no matter how far we come, we will never forget where we started. She placed the chip on the podium and stepped back. The chamber was still silent, but now it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of respect, of recognition. The Zorlak representative shifted uncomfortably in its pod, its scales glinting in the light. The other species exchanged glances, their earlier arrogance replaced by something else, something like awe. The human diplomat turned and walked back to her pod, her head held high. She sat down, her face calm, her hands steady. The session continued, but the tone had changed. The humans were no longer the butt of the joke. They were something else, something to be taken seriously. As the session drew to a close, the council members began to file out of the chamber, but many of them paused as they passed the human pod, their eyes lingering on the small, unassuming woman who had stood up to them. Some of them nodded, a gesture of respect. Others simply looked at her, their expressions unreadable. The human diplomat sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm. She knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that they had taken the first step. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated, that they were a force to be reckoned with. And as she sat there, surrounded by the hum of alien voices and the shifting colors of the chamber walls, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The stars were no longer out of reach. Humanity had arrived, and they were here to stay. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a marvel of alien architecture. Towering spires twisted into the air, each symbolizing one of the countless species that had joined this galactic alliance. The floor shimmered with patterns that shifted like flowing water, reflecting the weight of every decision made there. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy filled the chamber, beings with scales, fur, and translucent skin. Some floated, others walked, while a few slithered. They had all gathered for one reason, to debate the status of Earth and its species, humans. At the center of the hall, under the harsh light of the council's scrutiny, stood the human diplomat, David Ryland. He was alone, the only representative of Earth, facing a council that had long dismissed humanity as a backward, insignificant race. The moment he entered, whispers rippled through the assembly. Many council members laughed openly, their voices blending into a chorus of ridicule. Primitive creatures, one representative scoffed, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. They only recently discovered faster-than-light travel, and now they think they deserve a seat at this table? Destructive and reckless, added another. They are barely beyond their tribal wars. What could they possibly offer the galaxy? Chaos and conflict. Nothing more. The remarks grew bolder. One by one, the council members listed humanity's flaws: wars, environmental destruction, political instability. They painted a picture of a species doomed by its own short-sightedness, too emotional, too divided to contribute meaningfully to the galaxy. David stood silently, his face calm despite the onslaught of mockery. He had heard it all before, the stereotypes, the dismissals, but this was different. Here, in the heart of the Galactic Council, the stakes were higher. Every word spoken here would shape how humanity was viewed for generations to come. He knew that if he didn't speak now, his silence would be taken as agreement. When the last alien finished speaking, a hush fell over the hall. All eyes turned to David, waiting for him to crumble under the weight of their words. Instead, he took a deep breath, stepped forward, and began. "You're right," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Humanity is flawed. We have made mistakes, more than I can count. We have fought wars, polluted our planet, and struggled with division. But that's not the whole story. The hull remained silent, the laughter fading into an uneasy stillness. "We are not perfect," David continued, "but no species is. Every civilization represented in this hall has faced challenges. Every one of you has made mistakes on your path to where you are now. The difference is, we don't hide from our failures. We learn from them. We adapt. We grow." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You see us as reckless because we take risks. You call us chaotic because we refuse to accept limits. You label us destructive because we push boundaries. But that same spirit, the one you mock, is what drives us to achieve the impossible. When our backs are against the wall, we don't give up. We innovate. We survive." David's eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of each representative who had spoken against his people. "Look at what we've accomplished in such a short time. Less than a century ago, we were bound to one planet. Today, we stand here as part of the galactic community. We've faced extinction more than once, wars, plagues, disasters, and each time, we've rebuilt stronger than before. We don't fear failure because we know it's part of progress. And that's what makes us dangerous, not to you, but to the challenges that lie ahead. Where others see limits, we see possibilities." A murmur spread through the council, different from the mocking laughter earlier. This was something else: consideration, reflection. Humanity's story is not one of perfection. It's a story of resilience, of relentless determination. We've faced our darkest moments and come out the other side, not because we're stronger or smarter than anyone else, but because we refuse to stop trying. We don't claim to have all the answers. What we offer is the ability to think differently, to approach problems in ways no one else dares. We're willing to do what others won't. David stepped back, his voice softening but carrying the same weight. "Mock us if you want. Dismiss us if it makes you feel secure. But know this, humans will keep moving forward. We will make mistakes. And we will learn. We will stumble, but we will rise again. And one day, when you least expect it, you'll look around and realize we're not just part of this galaxy, we're shaping it." For a moment, the hull was silent. Then, slowly, a single representative, a tall, silver-skinned alien with glowing eyes, rose to his feet. He tapped his staff on the floor, a sign of acknowledgement and respect. One by one, others followed, until the entire chamber stood in silence, their earlier mockery replaced with something else: recognition. The council leader, an ancient being with a voice like rustling leaves, leaned forward. "Perhaps we underestimated you," he said slowly. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than we thought." David gave a slight nod, his expression calm but his heart pounding. He knew this wasn't a victory, not yet. It was only the beginning, but it was enough. As he walked out of the grand hall, the whispers followed him again. This time, they weren't mocking. They were curious, intrigued. For the first time, the galaxy saw humanity not as a problem, but as a force to be reckoned with, a species that, despite its flaws, would not be ignored. And somewhere, in the vastness of the cosmos, a new chapter in humanity's story had just begun. The Galactic Council chamber was a vast, domed structure, its walls lined with shimmering panels that displayed the symbols of countless species. The air was thick with the hum of alien languages, the scent of exotic oils, and the faint metallic tang of advanced technology. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated pods, their forms as varied as the stars they hailed from. Some were towering, insect-like creatures with iridescent exoskeletons. Others were gelatinous blobs that pulsed with bioluminescent light. And then there was the human diplomat, a lone figure in a simple black suit, Standing at the center of the chamber, the council had convened to discuss the latest addition to their ranks, humanity. For decades, Earth had been observed from afar, its people deemed too primitive, too divided, too volatile to join the interstellar community, but humanity had surprised them. In just a few short centuries, they had unified, harnessed their planet's resources, and developed faster-than-light travel. Now, they stood before the council, seeking recognition as equals. The council was not impressed. One by one, the representatives rose to speak, their voices dripping with condescension. The Zorlax, a species of crystalline beings, criticized humanity's reliance on fossil fuels in their early history. The Kaernax, a race of telepathic amphibians, mocked their tendency toward conflict and war. The Vrillians, with their sleek, reptilian forms, sneered at humanity's short lifespans and fragile bodies. Each insult was delivered with a tone of superiority, as if the council members were scolding a child who had wandered into a room of adults. The human diplomat stood silently, his face unreadable. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a calm demeanor. His name was Elias Carter, and he had spent his life preparing for this moment. He had studied the histories of countless alien civilizations, learned their languages, and immersed himself in their cultures. He knew what the council thought of humanity, and he had come ready to respond. When the last of the council members finished their tirade, the chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Elias. He stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He did not raise his voice or gesture dramatically. Instead, he spoke in a steady, measured tone, his words carrying the weight of centuries of human struggle and triumph. "You speak of our flaws," he began, "as if your own histories are free of them. You criticize our wars, yet your own civilizations were built on conquest and bloodshed. You mock our short lives, yet it is precisely because we know our time is limited that we strive so fiercely to achieve greatness. You call us primitive, yet we have risen from the dust of our planet to stand among the stars in less time than it took your species to invent the wheel." The chamber was utterly still. No one interrupted him. No one dared. "You look at us and see weakness," Elias continued, "but what you fail to understand is that our strength lies in our resilience. We have faced extinction-level events, fought wars that nearly destroyed us, and yet we endure, we adapt, we innovate, we survive. And now, we stand here, not as beggars seeking your approval, but as equals demanding respect." He paused, letting his words sink in. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their pods, their earlier confidence wavering. Elias took a deep breath and delivered his final statement. "You may see us as flawed, but it is those very flaws that make us who we are. And if you cannot see the value in that, then perhaps it is not humanity who does not belong in this council, but you." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, no one had a rebuttal. The representatives exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier arrogance replaced by a grudging respect. Slowly, one by one, they began to nod, their gestures of acknowledgement rippling through the chamber like a wave. Elias turned and walked out of the chamber, his head held high. He did not look back. He did not need to. He knew that his words had struck a chord, not just with the council, but with the countless species watching from across the galaxy. Humanity had been underestimated for too long, but no more. In the days that followed, the council's attitude toward humanity began to shift. They extended an official invitation for Earth to join the interstellar community, not as a junior member, but as a full and equal partner. The decision was met with celebration on Earth, but Elias knew that the real work was just beginning. Humanity had proven itself worthy of a seat at the table, but now it had to prove it could lead. Years later, as Elias looked out at the stars from his office on the newly constructed Earth Embassy, he allowed himself a small smile. The journey had been long and difficult, but humanity had finally taken its place among the stars, and as he gazed at the endless expanse of the cosmos, he knew that the best was yet to come. The Galactic Council chamber was a massive, domed structure made of shimmering alloy, its walls embedded with glowing veins of light that pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the cosmos. Representatives from countless species filled the room, their forms as varied as the stars they hailed from. Some were towering, insect-like beings with iridescent exoskeletons, others were gelatinous masses that shifted and rippled as they moved, and a few were humanoid, though their features were alien, with skin tones ranging from deep cobalt to shimmering silver. At the center of it all sat the High Arbiter, a being of immense stature, their body encased in a suit of biomechanical armor that hummed softly with energy. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the faint, metallic tang of advanced technology. Humanity had only recently been granted a seat at the table, a decision that had been met with skepticism and outright disdain by many of the older, more established species. To them, humans were primitive, their technology laughable, their history riddled with conflict and self-destruction. They were seen as a curiosity at best, a nuisance at worst, and today, that disdain was on full display. The topic of discussion was the allocation of resources from a newly discovered star system, rich in rare minerals and energy sources. Each species was presenting their case, arguing why they deserved a larger share. When it came time for the human representative to speak, the room grew quiet, but not out of respect. It was the silence of predators waiting to pounce. The human diplomat, a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez, stepped forward. She was tall and lean, her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, her sharp features framed by the harsh light of the chamber. She wore a simple, tailored suit, a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and armor of the other delegates. Her expression was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes, a quiet intensity that hinted at the storm brewing beneath the surface. She began her presentation, outlining humanity's need for the resources to rebuild after a series of devastating solar flares had crippled their infrastructure. Her voice was steady, her words measured, but the room was not listening. Instead, they were exchanging glances, their expressions ranging from amusement to outright contempt. When she finished, the silence was deafening. Then, the High Arbiter spoke. Their voice was deep, resonant, and dripping with condescension. Humanity, they began, you come before us with your hands outstretched, begging for scraps. Yet, what have you done to earn our respect? Your species is young, your achievements insignificant. You have not even mastered interstellar travel without the aid of others. Why should we grant you anything? The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, the sound like the rustling of leaves in a storm. Dr. Vasquez stood still, her hands clasped behind her back, her face unreadable. She waited for the noise to die down before she spoke again. Respect, she said, her voice cutting through the din like a knife, is not given, it is earned, and while you may see us as weak, as insignificant, you forget one thing. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of every delegate. We are survivors. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate, her presence commanding. You speak of our failures, but you ignore our triumphs. We have faced extinction more times than I can count. We have endured wars, plagues, natural disasters that would have wiped out lesser species. And yet, here we stand, not because we were handed the tools to succeed, but because we fought for them, because we refused to give up. The room was silent now, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. You look down on us because we are not like you, because we do not have your technology, your history, your power. But that is our strength. We are not bound by the same rules, the same limitations. We are adaptable, we are resilient, and we are united. She turned to face the High Arbiter, her eyes blazing. You ask why you should grant us anything? I will tell you why. Because we are the future. Because we have proven time and time again that we can overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. And because, one day, you will need us. And when that day comes, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember that you had the chance to stand with us, and instead, you chose to mock us. The room was utterly silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. The High Arbiter stared at her, their expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as though they might respond, might argue, might dismiss her words as the ramblings of a desperate species, but they did not. Instead, they inclined their head, a gesture of respect, and said, your words have been noted, Dr. Vasquez. The Council will take them into consideration. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was a start. As Dr. Vasquez turned and walked out of the chamber, her head held high. She knew that she had done more than just defend humanity. She had shown them that they were not to be underestimated, that they were a force to be reckoned with. And as the doors of the chamber closed behind her, the whispers began. Whispers of a species that refused to be broken. Whispers of a people who, against all odds, had stood tall in the face of ridicule and scorn. Whispers of humanity. In the days that followed, the Council's attitude began to shift. The mocking glances were replaced with wary respect. The dismissive comments were replaced with cautious curiosity. And when the final decision was made, humanity was granted not just a share of the resources, but a seat at the table as equals. Dr. Vasquez's words had not just shaken the stars, they had changed them. And in doing so, she had ensured that humanity's place in the cosmos was secure, not as beggars, not as curiosities, but as equals, as survivors, as the future.